Welcome to Trailblazers and Titans with your host, Dr. Keith Haney. Trailblazers and Titans is your go-to podcast for insights, inspiration, and actionable advice from the world's most successful entrepreneurs and leaders. Each episode features in-depth interviews with industry pioneers, innovative thinkers, and business moguls who share their journeys, challenges, and strategies for success. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned leader, or someone looking to make a significant impact, this podcast provides the tools and motivation to blaze your trail and become a titan in your field. Tune in to learn, grow, and transform your vision into reality.
Today we're leaning into a topic where many leaders quietly navigate, a few feel equipped to discuss, leading through cancer and major life disruption. Our guest today, Deb Krier, is a seasoned entrepreneur, communications and PR expert, and founder of tryingnottoDie.live. After having been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in 2015 and later basal cancer and thyroid cancer, Deb turned her personal battle into a mission. As a certified integrative cancer coach, she now helps high-performing professionals and their teams lead with clarity, strength, and resilience. During treatment and recovery, she blends business acumen and lived wisdom to guide executives through the most human challenges without losing their voice, their value, or their vitality. Deb, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Holy Schmoly. I am truly honored to be your guest. We're going to have a great conversation.
I am so looking forward to it. I'm going to ask you my favorite question, kind of get us warmed up a bit. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Just go with the flow.
Mm.
Which this day and age is a little tricky, right?
It is, because the flows flow in all kinds of ways.
Holy cow.
I like that, though. So let's dig into your story, because I think your story is so fascinating. You spent over 2 decades helping organizations tell strategic stories. Then cancer changed your own story overnight. Take us back to 2015. What shifted in your priorities, your identity, and how do you define success after that event?
Well, I'll do the last one first. I'm still here.
Yes, right.
Right? That's about as successful as you can get. But yeah, back in 2015, I was a good kid. I went in for my annual checkups like you're supposed to, had my mammogram, and I hadn't even gotten home when they called and said, you need to come back. Now, I also worked for the American Cancer Society, and I worked for an oncologist, so I know just enough to be dangerous, right? And I knew, it wasn't that I hadn't smiled pretty. So I went back, and what was initially diagnosed was microcalcifications. Now, I didn't know what that was, so I did the thing I do tell people to avoid. I went to Dr. Google.
Yeah.
And right, we really shouldn't do that. But I'd never heard of microcalcifications. Discovered that every woman over a certain age gets those as the hormones in our bodies change. And obviously, the vast, vast majority of the time, there's no problems. They just float around. And they're so small that the computer saw it. So this is before AI was doing things like this. But the computer was able to see those and see that they were starting to coalesce. So my initial diagnosis was stage 0, which is, we're not even, you're going to get a doctor, but we're not going to get too worried about it. And so I wasn't worried. Had a couple biopsies. I had a surgeon. I did not have an oncologist because nobody thought I needed one. Finally, after several months, we did do a little bit more in-depth surgery and took lymph nodes on the bad side. And 8 of 12 lymph nodes were positive. So I went from stage 0 to stage 3, just right, in the span of about 10 minutes. And that's when I started thinking, we could have a problem here. And because, stage 4 is the as high as the staging goes. And they said, hey, you've got stage 3. So I did get an oncologist, and I love her dearly. I still see her every 3 weeks. She said, what do you want to do? Now, I chose the traditional approach. I was going to do chemo, then I was going to do surgery, then I was going to do radiation. But one of the things that I tell people, and especially now, is you have to do what works best for you. If you don't think that treatment is going to be what's best for you, then don't do it. And don't let anybody talk you into it. So I had my first round of chemo. Was massive, 8 different drugs, because these little spickly spots were throughout my body, right? And it darn near killed me. I ended up with septic shock and in ICU, multiple surgeries. The doctors argued over how fast I was going to die. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I get to vote. Excuse me.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it was very bizarre. And in that process, one of the things that I said was, my rib hurts, the rib on the bad side. So they did a really fun test on that. And that came back as inconclusive. So the decision was made at that point to say stage 4. So my official diagnosis is stage 4, triple positive, which is actually fairly rare, triple positive metastatic breast cancer. I am, it was one of those things where up until that point, now this was 10 years ago, so hopefully the stats are a bit better now, but I was the only person who ever survived this complication, ever. I mean, I've been presented now in all sorts of papers and all sorts of things. But, I just kept thinking, I'm not done. No, I'm not done. God, whoever, no, we're not done. And so then I, once I finally was a little bit better, I did just, I had surgery, had a complication from that they'd never seen before because I'm special. And then I had radiation, sailed through radiation, which considering I am a redheaded, freckly kid, they were really surprised at that I did not have any side effects from the radiation, no burning, no anything. And then things, kind of got back to normal as they were going to be for me. The septic shock has done far more damage to my body than the cancer ever would. But yeah, just was sailing along. Several years ago, I was in my primary care doctor and she said, anything else? I said, well, I got this thing on my arm that won't heal. And whoop, off I go to the dermatologist who diagnosed basal cell carcinoma. It's funny, I think that sounds the worst out of all of it. Basal cell carcinoma.
Yeah.
It's your basic garden variety skin cancer, right? Many people have that. And I am the redheaded, freckly kid that grew up at an elevation of over 8,000 feet and still does not know what sunscreen is. So, that was easy. Didn't even take a stitch. But it was another diagnosis. And then it's been about 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And it is a totally new diagnosis. So I've had 3 totally different diagnosis of cancer. And the whole time, for the most part, I just kept working. I tell people hospitals and doctors' offices have really good Wi-Fi.
People who get diagnosed with cancer, it sometimes becomes their identity.
Mm-hmm.
How did you deal with that diagnosis, not you being cancer or you being, just kind of walk us through kind of what about your mindset, how did you take all of that?
I think a big part of it was based on that oncologist that I worked for, and it was probably 35 years ago. He has since passed away. But his philosophy was, this is just part of what's going to happen in your life, and how you deal with it mentally is going to be how you get through it. And I really do remember thinking, well, okay, this is just another chapter. If somebody refers to me by my diagnosis, I tend to get a little testy. And I tell
Must be
them,
the redhead part of you.
I know it is, and even though it's enhanced now, I am a natural redhead, or was. But yeah, if they, and I get that sometimes that's the shorthand way. But I had somebody one time refer to me as the thyroid cancer in room 4. And I went out and I said, excuse me. I get HIPAA. I know HIPAA. I understand you can't yell out my name, but I am not my diagnosis. That is just a very small part of who I am. And, I don't know if I made a difference with them, but they didn't call me the thyroid cancer patient anymore.
Now you're just a redhead in room 104. Yeah. I'm curious, you work a lot with business leaders, especially around this topic.
Mhm.
What do you wish business leaders and colleagues understood about cancer that you learned the hard way
Mhm.
from your own
Mhm.
experience?
It really is not the end. I think one of the things that I hear the most is that they feel that they cannot tell anyone about their diagnosis. And I was kinda hesitant also, I have my own marketing firm, and I wondered, what were my clients gonna say? Were they gonna say, "You can't do the work." Yeah, we just know that. Or would they say it in a nice way? "You need to focus on yourself." Or would they say, "Okay, just tell us what we can do." But it really was, how was I gonna deal with that? And I was very fortunate. All of my clients said, "What do we need to do?" And I still drop off the face of the earth every 21 days for a day or 2, and they're perfectly fine with that. But I think so many times we think as the leader that we have to be, and especially men, the strongest, the most independent, cannot complain, and we cannot share what's going on in our lives. And what I have found is people wanna help. They really want to be helpful, they want to support you. I had people who have supported me through this journey that I didn't even think knew I existed, and they were some of my biggest cheerleaders. Now, some of my friends from elementary school dropped off the face of the earth, and I don't know why. I don't know if it kind of, they were thinking, "Hey, this is their own mortality," or whatever, but, clearly that friendship had run its course, and it just wasn't anything I was gonna worry about. But people really do wanna help, and they want to share, and you do not have to go through this alone.
I had people on my podcast who have been employees who have dealt with cancer. I'm
Mhm,
curious
mhm,
because you've been at the top of the organization
mhm,
who's dealt with it. How is as an organization, do you deal with an employee who's going through a cancer
mhm,
diagnosis with
mhm,
compassion, realizing
mhm,
that that person is more important sometimes than
mhm,
the bottom line? Kind of walk
mhm.
us through some
Right.
suggestions you have with dealing with that in the
Mhm.
workplace.
Well, it's a little tricky because there's laws that
Yeah.
apply. And so, it really is. It's very tricky because if, the patient, and I don't like that word. I'm a warrior, and so if that person, doesn't want to tell anybody, they don't have to. Or they might go to their boss, their HR person, whoever, and say, "Here's what I'm dealing with, but you can't tell anyone." And by law, you cannot tell anyone. And so you still wanna try and basically meet them with what they need, and provide them as much as support as they can. And obviously, it depends on the size of the company. Some companies have more paid time off. You can work remotely. You can do a lot of things, and people never even know that there was a situation. If you've got an employee assistance program, I strongly recommend that people reach out to that because this is a mental health battle also. And it might not be you, it might be your family needs, to talk to somebody, but it is a challenge when it's an employee because you're not quite sure, maybe you are a person who works with them and they're looking a little rough. Now, I mean, some of it's gonna be obvious, right? But
Right.
you cannot flat out say what is going on. That is just you can't do that, but you want them to know that your door is open, that they can talk to you. If you're a coworker, maybe gently, "What can I help you with? Are there some tasks that I can be doing?" Things like that. Just I think more than anything, again, let them know they're not alone.
Yeah, that's good. So let's get back to the professionals, the high performing ones.
Mhm,
We often want to kind of grind our way through difficult times, sometimes even over functioning. What
mhm,
are the first three adjustments you recommend for leaders navigating the
mhm.
diagnosis and treatment of cancer?
First, you need to take an assessment of your business. And have and a lot of what you're going to be looking at is something that you should have been looking at anyway. Do you have plans in place, what they call business continuity plans? So if something happens to any senior executive, their tasks can be taken over. Who knows, who has all that information? Do people know who you bank with? all of those various things. And you should have those. Now, typically they're in our head, right? Unless you are a large organization that has this as a fairly formal process. And then, figure out what you're going to tell people. You want to control that message. You want to be in charge of it, but you do need to understand you need to say something because we don't like a vacuum. And if you don't say anything, the employees, the staff, the clients, your business associates are going to make things up. And the problem is we don't make them up in a good way, right?
No, not
We're going to
typically.
say, oh, he's looking a little rough. How much is he drinking at night? No, things like that. And now you don't have to tell them everything. I've been very open, but that has been very deliberate. Now, am I sharing everything? No, still not. But you can say, I'm going through something in with my health. I'll keep you posted as much as I can, but I'm going to need your help. And your staff, your employees had better say, what can we do? Because if they don't, you might not want to have them on your staff. Because obviously it depends on the business and all of those various things. But yeah, if you say, I need a little help, if they don't step up, or give you a reason they're not stepping up, then, really think about it. And then I think the other thing is to remember you are not alone on this journey. You might need to reach out to other peer groups. There are, certainly lots of support groups. There are several that are very specific for men because women like to share and we like to, all those things. But there are some cancer support groups that are very specific to men. You might need, as I was kind of saying, some mental health. You're grieving, you're angry, all of those various things. So kind of take stock. But then as part of that, think about what your priorities are. They're probably going to change, and go forward with that. And just know that if it's 5 days, if it's 50 years, you can deal with it.
So you're coaching someone who's going through this. You have to help them decide, what do I pause? What do I delegate? And what are the things only I can do myself? How do you have that conversation with an executive going through this?
First thing is make them write it down. What do you do every day? And how long does it take you? Now, I own my own business. I am a redhead. I am a type A. I did not know what the word delegate was. And it's still hard for me because in many cases, it's just easier to do it myself, right? Than to explain to somebody how to do it. Oh, I'll just do it. But think about what can be delegated. But more importantly, think about how you're going to be empowering those that work with you. You hired them for a reason. They're smart. They're talented. They've got all of those skills. So let's give them that chance to really shine. I think one of the biggest fears that we have is that they're going to go, ooh, we really don't need you. Right? And I get that. But at the same point, okay, maybe because the goal is that long term they continue those things. You might actually be able to go on vacation, things like that. But, think about what you can be doing with that free time, AI, I think, is going to start playing a bigger and bigger role in some of these things, responding to emails, doing all sorts of things. And so, things are going to change that way. But yeah, you got into your business because you had a passion for it, hopefully. So now you're freed up to maybe focus more on that passion or on other things. Maybe you're going to volunteer. Maybe you're going to get out of the business totally, whatever it is. But think about, how you're going to do all of those things.
So communication is critical in most organizations. We either do it well, or we build trust, or we either build confusion. There are some key people, I think, that have to be informed of what's going on in your business. Who are
You're
those
cutting
people?
up a bit. I can't hear you.
Oh, who are those key people in the organization communication chain that you have to connect with?
You'll know if you're oversharing. People will kind of get the uncomfortable look, right?
Right.
Ooh, I really didn't want to know. But some people want to know every single detail. my mother was one of those people, right? She wanted to know everything, and then she wanted to share it with everybody. But, start with telling them the minimum. And then if they need to know more, and it's going to vary also how much you tell as to who you're telling. Your executive team needs to know more. The people that are a little bit further down the job, the company, they don't need to know nearly as much. So, but it also might be that you've got some folks there that are going to be some of your best advocates and some of your best support system. But yeah, you'll know if you're oversharing because people really will get that uncomfortable stare at their shoes look. Um, and so it's tricky, but yeah, just and maybe think about it from the reverse. What would you want to know? You don't need to know every detail, but you need to know, okay, they have to leave at noon every Thursday. So what are we going to do Thursday afternoon? We're not going to party. we're gonna we're gonna keep functioning and all those things. So yeah, think about if you were learning this, what would you want to know?
I love that. So you're a certified integrative cancer coach. What does that mean?
So when I decided to be a cancer coach, I didn't want it. My business coach pushed me into it. And she kept telling me that I didn't go through everything I went through without using it to help others. But I didn't want to be cancer girl. I wanted to go back to living my normal life. But I realized that I helped people anyway. And I mean that was just something that was happening. So I went back to Google. This time it was a good thing, and really couldn't find cancer coach. I think I found like 10. And so my thought process was, well, either there's no demand for it, so it's a waste of my time, or maybe it's so new. And I decided it was new. And so then I started researching what programs were out there. And there's always the $30 program, right? You take, and that's okay. I've done some of the other classes through those. I mean, they're great for things like that. I also found several that were very, very detailed and part of, say, a psychology degree or even at a med school. Well, that wasn't what I wanted to do either. And so I finally found this great organization called the Cancer Wellness Institute. And I took a very detailed 12-week program with them. And we meet every month, and plus all sorts of other things. And I really learned some of it was reinforcing what I already knew, but other parts were, oh, I'd never thought of it that way. Or how do we help somebody through that situation? Now, I'm kind of the only one there that is dealing with people from a business perspective. I am a marketing person and I know that I need to niche. and so, I go with my people, right? But it's all the same. How can we help people through what might be one of the most difficult journeys they ever face? And like I said, you're grieving, you're angry, all of those things, and over and over and over again. And then there's always that, what if it comes back? We might make it through, but how are we going to deal with that? One of the terms a lot of people use is scan-anxiety. You have a scan, and until you know the results, you're thinking the worst, right? Even though, there was no reason for it. It was a checkup or whatever. You're still thinking the what ifs. And so how do you deal with that? How do you kind of deal with that constant elephant in the room? And that was a lot of what we talked about in the program that I went through.
So in your work, where does faith and meaning and purpose fit into what you do with your clients?
You know, I want people to know they can get through this. Whether it's that they are, like I said, maybe they just have 5 hours. Maybe they've got a very long time, but how are they going to get through it? And especially from a business perspective, how are you going to maintain your leadership, your authority? Is your business going to survive? And maybe you decide you don't want it to. I mean, that's one of the things, or that you're going to turn it over to somebody else, things like that. And I think that is kind of a different perspective because as a business leader, that's our baby, right? If we started that company, we want to, make sure that it is healthy and active and happy and going on forever. And so it is a big concern for us. It's also a lot of our time. I joke that hospitals have good Wi-Fi and same with doctors' offices. I'm always sitting in the doctor's office responding to emails. If I'm there longer, I've got my laptop and I might be working on a proposal or something like that. Now, part of that is it gives me something to think about, right? To focus my energy on. And some people are like, nope, I need to not be doing this. I'm going to take a sabbatical. I'm going to focus 100% on my health. Whatever works, works for you. But yeah, we want our businesses to continue. And so how do you do that? And it really is that delegating, that empowering, that planning. Really, just those simple things that we should have been taught that we really weren't.
Tell us the heart behind Trying Not to Die. What's on your platform? What do you offer?
So that name came from my mother. And my mother has passed away almost 2 years ago to the day. I saw that on Facebook because I don't really remember dates like that. And 2 years ago today was my last conversation with her. And it was one of the funniest conversations we'd had in a really long time. And so it was the perfect thing, right? But she came out. She lives in Kansas and I'm in Atlanta. And when I was circling the drain, of course she came out, right? And it was great. She came, she stayed. I was never alone in my hospital room. She was there. My husband was there. Somebody was always there. But I remember one time one of my wonderful medical staff came and went, and I got the disapproving mother face. And I went, what? And she said, you did not say thank you. And I went, oh, for God's sakes, Mom, I'm trying to not die here. And that was, that really was it. I was thinking, and I don't have time to be polite. But when I was thinking about what to name it, I really did think we get so caught up in trying to not die that we forget that we have to live. And live is actually an acronym, and it is the website URL. That's the cool thing about websites now. You can kind of give them whatever name you want. But and even if we don't have anything seriously affecting our health, sometimes we're just kind of plugging along, right? We're not really thinking, how are we going to live this life? I tell people, I don't want my headstone to say, I wish I would have.
I love that. What are 2 frameworks you can teach clients to start using this week we're dealing with this?
Figure out what it is that you do. And can you delegate it? And more importantly, figure out why you do it. Is it because you don't trust anybody else to do it? Hello, that's me. Or you're the control freak. Or is it just that you've never thought, hey, I can have somebody else do this? And I think you'll discover that there are many things that, granted, AI can probably take over now, or you have other staff, or maybe they don't even need to be done, right? How many times are we working on stuff that really don't need to be done? And so be thinking about that. But more importantly, think about how you want to be living your life. Get rid of the toxic people. Right now is a really tough time to be alive in a lot of ways, right? But look for those good things, and tell people that you love them. I had a little bit ago, an hour or so, I had a Zoom call with a friend of mine, and we ended by saying, I love you. She's a friend. 10 years ago, we would have never done that. It's okay, and for a guy, it can be love you, dude. Love you, man, right? That's all right. But yeah, tell people that or say thank you. Just be grateful. I think that's the thing that we always forget is how can we be grateful? I gave you a lot more than 2 right there, but they all kind of tie together.
No, I love those. What does resilience mean to you now compared to before your cancer?
Now I think a big part of it is really realizing what the priorities are. And knowing I can get through it. I had doctors saying I was going to die within 3 hours and they were not going to do the surgery that needed to be done. Why bother? And it was like, really? Yeah, and it was, I can hear y'all out in the hall having that discussion. Um, but, I think we do resilience is also figuring what is important. What do I need to keep doing? And how am I gonna get there? And who am I gonna ask to help me? I was very much a lone duck. Now, granted, my husband and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. But it was very much going life alone. Resilience is how can we get through this life the best possible way?
So, what's one myth about cancer in the workplace you want to retire?
It's not the end. It might end up, ending things, but that's not how you're going to end. You get to choose that. And really your business can go on without you or maybe not. But, it's also I think a big part of it is we need to get back to focusing on ourselves. And so it's not the end. It is, a lot of people say it's the beginning. I have people who tell me all the time, "Was this a blessing?" Yes. That sounds really weird, right? I've had 34 surgical procedures in 10 years, but I'm still grateful. My scars have scars, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't have my scars. But in business, really, it is a business. If it stops, it stops. It's not the end of the world. Focus on what's really important.
Sounds like a book there. My scars have scars.
I know, they do.
So, what's one boundary every patient and or caregiver should set early on in this process?
I think the boundary is making sure that people know that you are the person who's in charge. You as the patient, the survivor, the thriver, the warrior, the whatever the heck you're going to call yourself, you are in charge. And don't let them cross that boundary. And it gets, especially, we all have that fear of those white coats with the stethoscopes, right? They went to school for a bazillion years and they're really smart. No, you are in charge and you need to make sure that they know that and push back. If they say, we want you to do X, tell them no, or say yes, or we need more information. In my oncologist office, they have a sign in every room. Do not leave this room if your questions have not been answered. And remember that they work for you. You don't work for them, and make sure that they know that. It works also with your staff, with, everybody. You're the one in charge, nobody else.
What's one small daily practice that made a big difference for you?
Gratitude, really thinking about what am I grateful for today? And I'll be honest, sometimes it's that I woke up, you know, and, but, what are we grateful for? It doesn't have to be something big. And, we all think, ooh, gratitude, I mean, and I don't have a gratitude journal. I know a lot of people do, and they absolutely love them. I just don't need to write it down. But yeah, what are you grateful for? And really think about that. And it could be something little, maybe, sometimes it was, I didn't get sick today, right? But yeah, gratitude, I think is the biggest thing that I really try and do every day. Do I? No, but I try to.
So, I'm going to ask you my other favorite question. What do you want your legacy to be?
That I helped people. It's just that simple.
That's powerful. So, I'm going to ask you on the show, we have a new thing, a surprise question. Pick a
Oh,
number
no.
between 1 and 10 for your surprise question.
7.
What was the worst job you've ever had?
The worst job I ever had. I had to, now it was kind of a fun job, but it was also the tasks I had to do were icky. I worked for the Forest Service and I had to clean porta potties. That was not fun. No. Mm-mm.
No, it doesn't sound like fun. So, Deb, where can people connect with you on social media? Give us your website again and how to
Great.
best find you.
Well, again, thank you so much. And the one thing that we didn't talk about is faith is really what gets a lot of people through this. And make sure, like there were times where I wouldn't let them take me off to surgery until the pastor had been in, and things like that. So rely on your faith, have faith in yourself. I think that's the other thing. But yeah, tryingnottodie.live is the website. And yourcancercoach.live is the coaching program. I'm actually only on LinkedIn and Facebook because squirrel, right? I'd go down those rabbit holes and you'd never find me again. So those two, look, there's only 3 Deb Kriers in the world, so I'm pretty easy to find. And I am, I think, the only redhead. So it's pretty easy to find me.
Well, thank you. You're so right about that. Faith gets us through so much of life. Oftentimes it is, people sometimes look at it as it's the last resort. It should be the first resort that we have to get through difficulty. But for those who rely on that, it is a powerful. And I love your story because it reminds us that, yes, the doctors and the white coat experts are not the ones who are truly in charge. God is.
Yes.
And if
Yeah,
we lose
I say
sight of
I
that,
am, but I know.
but really God is. And it reminds us of that all the time. But Deb, thank you so much for.
Thank you. This has been an honor.
Yeah, thank you for your courage and for sharing your story, for your faith journey, your clarity. Your journey reminds us that leadership and faith isn't just what we do when life is smooth. It's who we become when the stakes are real. Friends, if this conversation spoke to you or someone you love, connect with Deb and explore trynottodie.live for coaching, community, and resources that blend compassion and practical strategies. Share this episode with a leader, caregiver, HR partner who wants to build a culture that supports people and performance. Start a conversation in your team or small group and ask this question: how can we show up wisely, kindly, and consistently for colleagues walking through cancer? If this episode has empowered you, encouraged you, please leave a like, a comment, and a review. Follow and rate it for us and share with someone who needs to be filled with hope in their situation. Deb, thanks again so much for your joy and for your faith.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trailblazers and Titans. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the insights shared, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing you the stories of the world's most inspiring leaders. Don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and exclusive content. Join our community of Trailblazers and Titans, and let's continue to learn, grow, and transform our visions into reality together. Until next time, keep blazing your trail and striving for greatness.